We now move on to our opportunities segment. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Rob Day, the Director of Turnaround, who will be discussing team development in the digital era using gamification. Over to you, Rob.
Thank you, Amal. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for letting me be here today. Some great speakers already today. I think you'll see that where we're going with this next presentation, certainly on the opportunity side, is very much aligned to a lot of what we've been hearing already. So what am I going to cover in the session? So I want to give you a little bit of an idea of the impact of change and the opportunity that change presents as well. I'm going to give a very brief history of team building over the generations, just to kind of put some context before we get into the meat of the presentation. And I'll look at the pre-COVID in terms of what's been going on for the last 20 years in the region. So I've been in the Middle East for 20 years. I set Turnaround up, I'm the Managing Director of Turnaround, about 13 years ago. So I'll give you an overview of what we've been doing and the industry's been doing in the last 20 years around that. We'll look a little bit at sort of gamification. I think, to be honest, my industry's perhaps been a little bit behind the gamification curve as well. But then it all changed 4 months ago, and we'll talk a little bit about our journey as a company and what we've been doing at Turnaround for the last 4 months. What have we learned? And perhaps most importantly in this opportunity section, what my personal beliefs are of the trends that we will be seeing and going through moving forwards. So first of all, this slide here, I have been showing this slide for the last 4 years. It's taken 4 years for it to be made true, and although just because you've been saying something for a very, very long time doesn't mean that eventually it will come true, as these people from the 1920s looking very disappointed with their predictions, and still to the day the end is not yet nigh, but definitely for if it wasn't on your doorstep, then it is now. The one thing that we're all going through at the moment is disruption, and what disruption means to our businesses, to our mental health, to our leadership, and all of the subjects that we've seen before. And whilst it may seem like it's an unsurmountable journey ahead of us, actually, the one thing that we do know about change is that change brings opportunity. And in fact, if there is no change, there can be no opportunity. So we are at a point in history where arguably we've never seen this exponential rate of change happening before. It was already fast. The technology disruption that was going on was already very, very rapid. Add to this the COVID pandemic, and it's really the scale is just gone off the scale at the moment. And what does that mean? Well, you know, the reality is that change is like the wind. It's always going to blow. What's interesting, and I'm a bit of a sailor, so this is us 2 years ago. So for the last 6 years, we have done the race to Muscat from Dubai. So it's about a 3 or 4 day trip depending on the weather, and this is us coming back 2 years ago. Now 2 years ago we won it, and we were all super excited about that as well. And you might be wondering why there's half a sail up. Is the first thing, and there's no front sail on the boat as well. That's because in November, it's 18 months ago, we had terrible storms. It was 30, 40, 45 knots of wind that we had, and it was a pretty full-on experience. But there's a couple of things that I learned from that. The first thing is, even when the storm is coming, in sailing, if you get the cut of the sails right, you get the right length of sail out, you've got the right crew on board, and if everybody's prepared, you can head directly into the storm and you can make progress. So whilst everything is coming back at you, you can still be making traction and moving forwards. The second thing that's really interesting about sailing, and I think something that's interesting now as much as anything when we talk about opportunities, is when we hit the top of the Musandam. So we head up, we have the wind towards us. Once we head up the top, and then we head back down, initially towards Iran, and then back down to Muscat, the wind changes direction, or rather you change direction, so the wind changes with you, and suddenly the wind comes from behind you. And even in a storm with the wind behind you, you can start to surf the waves, and the progress that you can make can be absolutely tremendous. So with all of this in mind, and the opportunities that this change presents, let's go through a little bit deeper. So what I'm going to do now is give a very, very brief history of kind of my take on team building over the last 100 years or so. Not that I've been here for 100 years, but just to kind of give a little bit of background. So this gentleman here, looking very pleased with himself as well, is a man called Eaton Mayo, and I'm calling him the godfather of team building. Well, maybe or maybe not. Now, you may not have heard of Eaton Mayo directly, but I'm sure, and you may not have heard of the Hawthorne effect directly, but I'm sure when I tell you the story that you will be familiar with this. So Eaton Mayo and his team, so back in 1924, were one of the first groups of people that started to do research on the working and living conditions for people, for employees in the workspace. They changed lighting conditions, they changed the length of breaks that they had, very small things that they were doing. But the objective behind this was to see what effect it would have on productivity and on performance. The commonly touted story of the Hawthorne effect, and the Hawthorne effect is the idea that just the mere act of doing an observation on people makes them feel valued, and therefore that the productivity increased. Now, these were the very early researchers findings that came out of this. They have later, with more modern analysis, been disproved, but this was the idea of the Hawthorne effect, and whether or not what they did at the time was true or not, it certainly sparked a wave of people getting involved in how do we make the employee experience richer, and as a result, I guess, make ourselves richer as well. I'm sure capitalism existed just as much back then as it does now. So just moving on a little bit now. If you've ever been on a turnaround event, I can promise you that we would never have done a trustful, but there are all sorts of stories over the years of people cringing about having to do these trustfuls, but clearly one of the things that they were wanting to do was start to build trust, and trust has still to this day been maybe not in the form of people falling backwards and being caught, but the idea of building trust in teams is something that's always been very, very important. This moved on, and perhaps one of the best places that you can look for sort of activity-driven team development and leadership styles is out the army, and they call them PLTs, and PLTs are practical leadership tasks. So you can see the poor four guys on the left here trying to lift up that enormous cable barrel there, and it was always quite physical, working together, collaborating, leveraging strengths. And for a while, it was definitely a good source of team building and team development. If ever you've done the spider's web or the electric fence, then these are army-based activities. This is a good friend of mine. This is the only picture I could find of Rob. He's retired now, but it's Rob on the left, in case you're not sure which one's which, and there's the Queen on the right. Again, just if we're not sure who's who. Rob was one of the lead instructors at Sandhurst. And Sandhurst is the big military academy in the UK. And Rob and I worked together about 14 years ago. He's been a friend ever since as well. And we were trying to look at whether or not we could take some of the army-based activities and bring them into the corporate world. So even back then we were looking at, where do we get our products and where do we get our activities from? And they would have activities where there would be a grenade that was about to explode, and how did the team get to manage the problem to get it done. And we were thinking about whether or not there would be a metaphor for grenades in the boardroom, but over the years we built up a good friendship, and we've blended many of these types of activities into the work that we're doing. Moving on, I think we get into the high ropes type activities. I'm sure many of you have done these over the years as well. And this is two kind of areas that the high ropes were looking at. You can see the bottom left-hand picture. Trust was a big one, about working together and trusting each other in scary situations. You're up high, you're facing your fears, and working together as a team in order to get that done. And perhaps one of the most famous ones is the leap of faith, where you have to climb up a pole, stand on the top of it, and then leap off it as well, with the rest of your team gearing you on. And this was the start of this kind of breaking through barriers, getting people to think beyond their comfort zones, or at least stretching them to the limit of their comfort zone and seeing how they performed as a result of that. Then along came NLP. Now, don't get me wrong, I was trained under Bandler 25 years ago, one of the originators of NLP. I think it's a fantastic tool, but in the team building space, it started to manifest itself into people doing fire walks. Now, NLP cannot be accredited for inventing the fire walks. This is sort of 3,000 years ago, I think, are the earliest cases of people walking across fire coming out of China and India. But they definitely resurrected this passion of having whole corporate teams of people walking across hot coals, believing that they could do anything. Maybe if you're in a conference room, you may have done the arrow break, where you snap the arrow against your neck or break the board. All of this about breaking limiting beliefs as a team and being more effective with each other. We've also had some great inspiration over the years of places for research. Some of the best places have come from NASA and have come from Antarctica. So Antarctica talks about these ice conditions. These are isolated and confined environments. And this is where, you know, the biggest problem with the launch to Mars that's going on. We've got the UAE Mars Hope probe going up there in the bottom left. The biggest concern that they have for a manned mission to Mars, it's not the hardware, it's not the software, it's the humanware, and whether or not you would be able to survive. Normally on a conference, I'd get you to look at your neighbours, but perhaps it's the same thing back at home. We're having to struggle at home with our wives and families and kids in these isolated environments as this goes on, and the pressures and the challenges that this faces. And these have been good areas for us to look at where to get research from. So this was a white paper I wrote about 5 or 6 years ago, or an extract from that really looks at what team building up until everything's this March 2020. This is the last face-to-face event that we have done as a company, was done in the beginning of March 2020. So in the last 20 years that I've been here, what's been going on? What's been going on in the market? So we've got a little continuum here on the bottom, where we go from pure fun on one side across to a kind of sort of team bonding, socialization element, moving towards a business focus on the right-hand side here as well. Now, look, arguably, you may have been on team building days when they've taken you go-karting, or you've done archery, or clay pigeon shooting, or even bowling. Now, we don't really view these as sort of corporate-based team building. Yeah, they're fun, and there's definitely a team building component to that. But because we see these as more individual-based tasks, we kind of, it's not something that's a focus area for us. Moving away from that, we get into the sort of beach Olympics where people are working in teams together. Arguably, paintball has an opportunity for that team development of people working together, and also escape rooms. The modern day escape rooms are a great example of team-based work. The reason that I haven't put them in what I call this experiential zone is because traditionally when you go and do paintball or you go and do an escape room, there isn't a facilitator that's leading some kind of debrief afterwards. There's definitely a lot of opportunity to debrief and look at the mirrors back in the real world from this, but it's not something that's traditionally offered within those. So moving into this sort of experiential learning zone and doing scavenger hunts and conference-based energizers or activities where we're doing bonding-based activities, but with a business or a slight learning focus that we're moving towards. We then get into the different styles, the different genres of some of the most popular team building over the last 20 years. Drumming activities, drum circles, different types of instrument with different people playing is a classic collaboration-based team building, team bonding, look at what we can do when we work together kind of message. You'll have the movie and TV productions. If you haven't been on a movie or a TV style advert team building production, then shame on you and shame on your company as well. They've been one of the most popular for many, many years, where people have to work together to produce some kind of movie with some message around the business that's connecting people to those as well. The other, perhaps one of the most famous team building activities over the last 20 years is the picture one. where different people are putting together, working on different sections of an overall canvas and collaborating to produce a beautiful work of art. And the other most common ones that we've seen in this kind of space of team bonding and light business messaging is design and build. So design a boat, race a boat, design, build, race, design a car, build a car, race a car. Also bridges as well, so you can design little activities around here. Then when we start to move further up this experiential zone, we get into the more business style games and business style simulations. We start connecting into mission, vision and value based activities as well. And these business games are typically run in a way where we call these predictable behaviors. So we deal in something that we call predictable behaviors, where if I know that you're going to behave a certain way, then I know that I can drive a certain business outcome and a learning outcome from that as well. So these business simulations are typically progressive challenges where one activity builds on the next activity, and often the lessons that were learnt from the first exercise are then amplified in the second exercise as we go as we go through this. And kind of the far end of the spectrum is getting into more strategy type simulations. Lots of different companies out there doing strategic simulations, and then into sort of team diagnostics and personality profiling and team-based diagnostic tools that can be done. So this was the oh, someone's just started sharing their presentation. Do I need to do anything? I think I might need to share again. Hold on a sec. Just 1 second. Is that called a that's not a photo bomb. What do you call that? A Teams bomb or something like that. Anyway, so can everybody see again? Let me just have things arranged in a particular way. I'll assume everything is okay unless I see anything else coming up into the Q&A. Yes, so that's kind of a bit of an overview of what's been going on over the last 20 years or so. Before we get into the next stage, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about what gamification is. And this guy here, Yukai Chu, is arguably one of the gurus of gamification. He has this very interesting framework called the Octalysis. It's called the Octalysis because it is an analysis with 8 sections. Obviously, it's Octalysis, and they're looking at the 8 different areas of gamification. The way that we create meaning, the accomplishments that we get to do, being empowered into doing things, the social influence that we can get from this, and the ownership, the idea of scarcity and gems not being available in games, and unpredictability coming in, where all of you are subject to the unpredictability gamification. Every time you check your email on your smartphone, you are sliding down. You get the little wheel that tells you as it's loading, and then you find out whether you did or whether you did not get an email. This is effectively playing around with the neuroscience of gambling. So I'm afraid if you are one of those, you have been hooked in. It was unintentional, I think. There's a guy called Tristan Harris from Google who talks a lot about this. It wasn't what they intended when they slid it down, but definitely it's turned into that more gambling type thing. And it's motivational, it's encouraging. You go in and you want to see if you've got one, and you slide it down, and if you've got one, that's a good thing. And also avoidance. So this is looking at it from a more video game design. But as we move away from the more face-to-face and into a more virtual-based culture, we're going to start to see this gamification, these elements of gamification coming in a lot stronger than we've seen before. So look, historically, as a company, we've definitely had our eye on gamification, but we've done it very much on internal metrics within companies so that they're able to compare against themselves. We've done cross-team competitions. We've had leaderboards. I'll show you an example of those as well. And we're also part of a bigger network where some of the activities that we have, there are global times that we can use for this. But to be honest, we've been using this as a way of motivating people on the sessions. But most of the time that we have been using gamification within our experiential learning programs that we're doing is to build pressure. and to build stress, because the more pressure we can create, the more realistic we can create the environment. So what we're looking to do is get people's default behaviors. So if they suddenly think there's a global world record of 3 minutes to get something or 5 minutes to get something done, it applies pressure, and we start to see more natural behaviors come out of the teams as well. So this was kind of, again, so pre-March 2020. So this was our leaderboard that we had. It's a little bit small, I think, for that, but you can see that Deloitte are currently we have a great tent exercise where 6 minutes 48 to build a tent under certain conditions. The Chocolate Factory is another one held by eSolutions Maximo, who've got a record score of 12,870, and so on and so on and so on. So we've been publishing this, but we've been, to be honest, it's been a limited use of gamification. But in 2019, we got a little bit of a glimpse of the future. So there is one of the jobs that we have. We're very blessed here in the Middle East. Everybody wants to do business in the Middle East, and everybody finds it very difficult to do business over here. So lots of people are looking for partners or strategic partners or franchise owners as well. So we were approached by a very small company from Romania called Brainup, and they had a program called Before Mars. This is pre-COVID, Before Mars in action. And whilst it may look like a traditional strategy type game, and in some ways it is, the reason that they got our attention more than anybody else was for 3 reasons. And those reasons were, number one, these guys were looking at it from a digital integration perspective. So what you see here, so I won't go into the mechanics of the game, but this is the project bidding round. So historically, the project bidding round would have been done in groups, and you would have written it all out and handed it into the facilitator. Now it was done digitally. This makes a much nicer user experience, is the first thing, but it does some other very, very cool things as well. And one of the things that, because they were then tracking everything digitally, including the scoring mechanisms as well, we were able to be part of the not just global competition, but also performance benchmarks. So the system was able to show what the lowest historical score was, what the maximum score was, what the average score was, and what your score was as well. So these performance benchmarks are showing people, are we normal? So we ran this with a government agency out of a regional government agency. I won't say which government it was from, and they got a score of 76%. Now that was the highest in the UAE up to that point, but it got them asking some very interesting questions like, what if we're 76% in the real world as well? And it starts to open up the idea of how can we be better and how can we do more as well. So that was really good. The third thing, and this is the thing that by far is the most important, especially as we look at moving forwards as well, is that because they were tracking what was happening, all of the decisions that were made, all the choices that were made were being tracked through the iPad and through the system. We were actually able to give behavioral analytics to people as well. So what do I mean by that? If you've been on any of these kind of simulation games before, often there's a low risk, medium risk or high risk route that you would take. And the low, medium risk and high risk routes are often require high levels of data analytics to understand which is the best route to go down. So we now know that within this game, there is an ideal way of winning. There is a maximum score and there's an ideal way of actually delivering this. And that requires certain decisions to have been made. So if those decisions are not made in favor for a different decision, we're able to give behavioral analytics on this as well. So this is suddenly where, and to do this with 8 teams of people and 2 or 3 facilitators observing this, historically is absolutely impossible. You could, maybe there's some behavioral analytics that you could look at, but this was able to, because it's a machine, the machine just does what it's told to do. And when it's told to count the number of these versus the number of these, we can then produce meaningful data from that as well. So this was a glimpse of the future. We started running Before Mars maybe 12 months ago. We got 8-9 months of running it. Fantastic feedback from clients. and then March 2020 came in, and of course COVID. And if you don't know what that is, I think we'll see that in the future, and it'll probably send shivers down our spine. But COVID came for us. It pretty much destroyed our current business model and forced us to look for the opportunities that this change was then presenting. We spent a 4-month rebuild, so there are some familiar products here from our face-to-face range, but we've been starting to rebuild virtual versions. So what we haven't done, we know we've been looking at our competition. A lot of them have taken existing products and just made them go virtual. We've chosen a different strategy altogether, which is to build complementary versions that work in a virtual environment. So the Before Mars that sits in the middle there still could run as a face-to-face, assuming that at some point in the future we end up in that environment. But the actual virtual version is a different program, it's a different product. We believe in the future people will start to do variations of both. They'll do a virtual, they may even do a virtual session before they do the face-to-face version to get the amplification of learning that you can get from multiple chunk size learning moving forwards. So we've been busy over the last 4 months, as I said, rebuilding, looking at which ones can be social distance friendly as we start to try and move towards that space, which ones we can't run unless it's pure face-to-face with no social distancing, and those that work just as well in the virtual environment as well. Now we get into the main part of what I wanted to talk about, which is what did we see and what have we learned as a result of this? Because this has been fascinating for me over the last 4 months. It has validated a lot of stuff that we thought about, but it's also now helping us to focus on the direction that we're going to be going in and where we think the industry will be going in moving forwards as well. So I'm going to take one of our programs called Cocrackers. This has been one of our most, in fact, probably our most successful virtual workshop that we have been running over the last 4 months. And it has 3 different levels. Those different levels are for various different things, some of them on the challenge level, but also on the time. So some of them, the game time is longer or shorter than others. Now, why am I talking to you about Cocrackers? There's lots of fun stuff that people can do online. What we've been looking at doing is trying to do it that's fun, but with a development focus as well. So many of the games that are working in this initial phase of these virtual team-based activities and team development activities have been on an information distribution model. What does that mean? It means that if you're in a team of 5 or 6 people, then of those 5 or 6, each of you is given a different subset of information. So overall, you have all of the information, but individually you have some of the information. So this is trying to mirror the idea of collaborative virtual problem solving by a team-based collaborative virtual problem solving. We start off in Zoom and we put people into breakout rooms and let them work on different challenges, and we then measure their time. And we also then ask them some questions a little bit afterwards as well. So that's the kind of the general philosophy of this of different information and how do teams find their ways in this new virtual environment to start to share information, collaborate and solve problems, which in some way is mirroring what teams are actually doing back in the real world as well. Now, so this is the current time for level 2. The fastest time that we have seen so far is 28 minutes 32 seconds. So this is now our benchmark, and we've got maybe 12 teams that we've run through this in the last 2 or 3 months. So we're getting some good benchmark data on this. Not 12 teams, 12 clients. So maybe 100 plus 150 teams that we've run through this. This is an example of what we would then show to the client afterwards. So the fastest time is 28 minutes. Their fastest time in this particular case, I won't say which client this was 34 minutes, and their slowest time was 68 minutes. What's also very interesting with this particular client is that the fastest time was held by the IT department. The head of IT was in that team, and the slowest time, and this maybe is going back to you, Paul, and your not reluctance, but your just struggle with the embracing of technology, was the CEO's team as well. So clearly this is nothing to do with intelligence. There was something else at play that was here. So we then asked 4 general questions, and we've shaped these questions a little bit to where they are now, but these are the questions that we are now asking. We want to know about how well they've planned. The second question, this is the real kicker, which we'll go into in a little bit more detail for this case study, is around leveraging technology. The third one is the way that they communicate, and the fourth one is how they manage to keep alignment going through. So these are our generic ones that we do. We can customize these for clients depending on what they're wanting to, on what their specific outcomes are. But these are good, solid, general questions that we feel are relevant to each of the different teams. So the first question, this is some real data here, is about before we started, did we take time to have a good debate and discuss before we started on our plan of action? And what you're seeing here is a very typical score. So typically people say yes, and the no's are a little bit lighter. There will always be some people saying no, but this is an indication that people are not struggling with the traditional skills that teams have, which is about making sure that we come up with a plan together. Question 2, and we'll look at this in more detail. This is the really interesting one, and this was about the way that they shared information and the use of technology that goes around that as well. So I'll come back to that in a second. This one was around communication. So there's some very interesting research from Google, and we wanted to try and test this. And Google look at, on conference calls, they track the amount of time on a Google Hangouts or a Zoom or all of these ones. You'll notice that when you're talking, a little light comes around your box. Yep. And if you say something, perhaps a little small bar comes at the bottom until you've talked longer, and then it goes full round. So that gives Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever you're using an indication as to whether you're talking a lot, whether you're commenting, or whether you're or being silent altogether. The Google research shows that in problem-solving environments, which may not be representative of all virtual meetings, but in problem-solving environments, where a team had a more equal amount of time spent talking, that team generally in the research would outperform other teams as well. So they were showing the value of discussion and equal time spent talking. And again, so we see it ranges from sort of 70–80% of people saying yes, we spoke for a similar amount of time, down to about 50% where we get a half-half. And obviously the half-half, not obviously, but we believe it's the half the people who were talking all the time that said, yes, I had a chance to talk. And the other people saying no were the people that weren't talking because somebody else was hogging all the conversation as well. That's anecdotal, but I think we can all relate to that as well. So we'll come back to that question right at the end as well. The last one was on alignment, which is during the activity, did we make sure that we were spending regular time to make sure that everybody was aligned? This is absolutely critical in the virtual environment, more so than face-to-face as well. And if people start to lose behind, then we lose engagement and it becomes a bit of a disaster. And again, this kind of score that we're seeing here, that this is a reasonable representation of that as well. It's quite common that people are doing these more traditional team development, team working skills very well, but it's this question 2 area, which we'll now go into in a little bit more detail. So question 2, which is the one that we asked, which is the following best describes the way that you shared information across the team. So we have 4 levels here. Okay, so these questions are relating to 4 levels of virtual performance, if you like. Level 1 is we use verbal instructions. And on any of the games that we do, if you're just talking to those instructions and writing down what you hear based upon what everybody else has said, this is very, 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 very challenging. Very, very challenging to do. So the next level is when people start to use the chat function in Teams or Zoom or whatever it is, and I'll type my information in and you'll type your information in, and from that we can start to make a bit more sense of it as we see what's going on. That's level 2. Level 3 is where one person says, hold on, I've got this. They open up Microsoft Excel or Microsoft PowerPoint, they share their screen, and then when everybody else talks, they then type the information in. So they become the bottleneck. So it's definitely a level above, but because it helps to everybody see what's going on. But there is that bottleneck of one person being in charge. I'm in charge of the meeting, you tell me and I'll type it down. So that's level 3. The 4th level, and where if you're not at this level as an organization, then maybe you're doing something wrong. This is our suggestion, is the use of collaborative document sharing. Most organizations, maybe without even knowing it, have access to something. Google Docs was one of the originals. They were one of the first. If you have Google Docs, it means that everybody can contribute at the same time. If you have Microsoft Teams, which we're in today, in Microsoft Teams, I can upload a file, I can open it within Teams, and I can have everybody in that call contributing at the same time. This goes beyond, and there are some fantastic whiteboarding collaboration tools. I mean, even Jambox in Google is a good start. But Miro and Mural, these types of these will become the future. So businesses that are struggling with this, we believe, are struggling with performance as well. And let me show you a little bit more. So this, I'm not giving names of clients, but this is the last 4 jobs that we did, all in the last 2 weeks, and what people have said. So it's difficult to read, but it's level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. So we can see here that it's very clear that very, very few of the organizations that we're working with, and there are multinationals included in here, as well as quasi-government and local entities, without exception, all of them are struggling to leverage the use of technology in this virtual environment. And as a result, we believe that's why, just to go back, that's why they're getting a score of between 34 minutes and 68 minutes. Not because they're not smart, but because they're not leveraging technology as well. So that's the last 4 months. So what's next? And I'll show you what we've been working on. So these are the guys. These are the guys at BrainUp. So this is the Romanian guys that we've been working with. We've now joint ventured with them on a particular product. And what we will be doing is building, and this is going to be released mid-August, early September. So it needs to be fast. This is that riding the wave. We need to surf we need to be surfing the sailing boat, not fighting into the storm on this one. And there's always going to be hopefully an advantage for early adoption. But our plan is to bring in the gamification into the activities within a Zoom-styled environment. So that at the moment we're working on Zoom or Microsoft Teams, and we have an external application that and the two are not talking to each other because they don't know how to talk to each other at the moment. So what we will be doing and what we see the industry will be doing as well, we're hoping that we're one step ahead of everybody else, is that you're going to start to see activities, virtual-based activities coming in to their own video conferencing platform as well. I'll explain why we're going to do that in just a second. So we can control all the content and all of the actions can be controlled by us. So here we can see a piece of information that was given to you. So and different people have different sets of information. So going back to the same methodology that I mentioned earlier. Can we get these slides? You can get in touch with me and I'll give them to you, that's for sure. I just seen a question come through. Sorry, so I'm distracting myself. So what is it that we're going to be able to do when we control this content? Where can we be going with this? Well, there will be digital leaderboards, of course, as the main thing, but gamification, as I said, is going to come more and more into this. There'll be global leaderboards as well, but this is when the imagination starts to go pretty crazy. So I'm going to finish up with, these are my predictions for where the virtual team development space, and I think arguably virtual working is going to continue forever. That's it. There's not any company that I know that is going, no, we're going to go back. Everybody's going to be in the office all the time. In which case we need to learn to work virtually in a team-based environment more efficiently than our anecdotal research has shown in the last 4 months. So first thing, it's going to be fully integrated. So the platform that you use for the activity will also host the communication and the video conferencing that goes with that as well. The reason why is that it gives us the ability to, so this is us leveraging off Google and saying that we're going to track the time people are talking. So we'll be able to track the time people are talking and we'll record all of that during an activity. We'll also be able to track the number of clicks that they've done. If you have seen the same piece of information 12 times, then that's not particularly efficient. So we'll be looking for these types of data-driven metrics. Remember, I spent the glimpse of the future with the Before Mars, where we started to track behavior, to track actions in there. But by tracking the number of clicks, which would be almost impossible to do visually if it was being done by an observer watching this, we just get the system. It just tracks all of that for us. This will then enable us to give individual and team-based performance as well. So if we're assuming that we're doing an activity, a debrief, another activity, and then a debrief, which has always been our preferred style to get people, see where you are, put a strategy, see how that strategy changed. Did you improve your performance? Have another go, and just look at developing as we go along the way. So this individual and group feedback will become super interesting. It'll also enable us to be able to benchmark certain performance, so you can see how you were against other people as well. Now, this is the one I want to get. This is the stuff that gets me very, very excited. So if I'm able to track the amount of time people spend talking, and I know what information has been given to that individual, and I know, because I've designed the game, what value that information is, I can give you an individual report that says, hey, Rob, you just spent 32% of the time talking in that last activity, and yet you had 10% of the value of information. Now, there's not necessarily a judgment here, and you may say, oh no, but I was the leader. Okay, so the leader talks all the time. Is that how it works? But there's opportunity for us to present this type of information through to you and have you self-reflect on it. Now, with machine learning, there could be the opposite as well. So we could have had somebody who had 10, 20% of the value of the information, but spent 5% of the time talking, because they're a little bit more introverted by nature, and get tired of in these meetings that it's always the same people having the same conversations and talking loudly and not listening to their input anyway. So imagine a simulation where the next round of that simulation, the people who did too much talking will give them less valuable information next time, and the people who didn't talk enough, we give them higher value information next time. So we're forcing people in and out of their own comfort zones using machine-based learning to give us a more effective way of helping people to self-reflect on their behaviors, the impact of their behaviors, and how it affects the overall performance of the team. So this is the kind of stuff that keeps me awake at night at the moment. We're hoping to do global leaderboards, corporate leaderboards, where we will run an international once a month, once every 2 month challenge, where different corporates will go in, they'll submit teams, to come onto this, so you can see, okay, we think we're a good team. And there's a lot of good teams here that we've worked with. We know there are, but actually, how good are we on a international level? So the idea that people might socialize corporate socialization through gamification on a global leaderboard, where at the same time they're learning skills that will make them more effective in the workplace. That's where the kind of gamification kind of comes in, and I think becomes very, very exciting. We'll be able to bring in, so I've kind of touched on this, but we'll be able to start to bring in more advanced gamification techniques using more video game based stuff, because it's all within that same fully integrated platform that we have. Now, sit down. I know you already sat down. Okay, I'm sure most of you are, unless you're pacing around your room. This is a question that we asked in our organisation. I can see, we were sat around. We don't have a big office. We were sat around the sort of the team table, and we said, "Hey guys, we need to talk about disruption. We need to talk about disruption. Are we at risk?" was the question that we were asking, and we sat around and we talked and we laughed. And the idea that people would be able to run team building with no facilitator seemed ridiculous to us at the time. Now, 4 months down the line, that's not the case at all. And actually, I think it's going to go beyond that, and there will be no facilitators. So with our machine learning, if we run an activity where we know what certain behaviors are going to come out of that, I might have a list of 10 questions that I would then ask as a facilitator My job as the facilitator is to then think cleverly which of those activities and which of those questions would be most relevant for these individuals. But we can get a machine to do that. So based upon the number of clicks, based upon the number of time talking, based upon the individual feedback, we will be able to run a system that is able to run itself. So people will be able to log in. They will not necessarily need to facilitate. They might do initially just so that they understand the methodology of this. But I now see where I didn't see before, a future where my job no longer exists and is taken on by a fully integrated solution like this. And whilst I said, yeah, 8 to 12 months ago, we thought this was lunacy and that it would never happen. Now we're actually investing in what's this? This is yes. Okay. So I'm just. If I look distracted, it's because I keep jumping into people's messages that are coming through. Okay, let's go back a step. So no facilitators. No facilitators. What does that mean as well moving forwards? Well, what it does mean is that we can actually use this as a corporate diagnostic. So we are also then envisaging the ability. So at the moment, I can come in and run a diagnostic across your organization where we run a session for every single team, and we can give you the performance that they did, the benchmark. I can give you the answer to those 4 questions that I've shown you, and I can write you a report for that. But to do that for every team in your business is expensive. But if we can do it without facilitators, then we can bring the cost down and we can make it a massive ROI case for this. So you would then be able to identify the teams within your organization that are working well virtually and the teams that are not working quite so well virtually. If they're not working so well, typically what we've seen is because they're not leveraging the technology. That seems to be the primary issue that we're seeing with teams at the moment. Obviously, there will be other areas that come out, but in terms of quick wins, every business that we've worked at in the last 4 months would do better, would be more productive if they spent more time focusing on how to leverage the technology around them. So we're moving into a talent management space as well around this. So this is kind of my prediction on how I think the future will look, and my justification based upon the last 4 months and last 20 years of where we're getting to there. And I've just realised that I've cut off my email. I'm not sure if you can see that. Let me just scroll down and move, and I'll just hold on a second. I'll just slide that back up a couple of inches so that you can all see that. Sorry, wrong one. There we go. I need to slide this one up. Okay. So that's my email address. I'll have a little look at the Q&As now to see what's been going on with there, and do send some more through as well. Hi Rob, there's lots of taking. Looking at L&D as an expensive. Yes, expense, not an investment. Right. Well, so that first question. So I'm looking at the first question from Mohammed here. So a lot of companies in this part of the world are looking at L&D as an expense and not an investment. If we are able to significantly bring the cost down of these team developments, then we have a strong ROI case. As a company, we are actually the first company in the Middle East that even before COVID, we were offering an ROI guarantee. We said that to all of our clients, if you take our package with the follow-up coaching that goes with it as well, because if you run a one-off team building session, you can't expect miracles from that. That's not how it works in the real world. But we have said if there's an action planning that's done and coaching follow-up that's done as well, that we will guarantee a return on investment. So that was with face-to-face and the cost that is associated with face-to-face. First of all, doing stuff virtually, although as a company, it takes us as much, if not more effort, especially making sure that the technology works right, the market is not prepared to pay the same amount of money. And so therefore it's cheaper. But I would argue that okay, let me give you a situation here. So Cocrackers, we have 3 different levels for. Level 1, level 2, level 3. It was designed, you can buy one of them and do a one-off, but it was designed in mind that we would do level 1, a week later, we would do level 2, a week later we would do level 3. Each one changes in progression and challenge and extra challenge moving forwards. When we have done this would have been impossible to do face-to-face before. The idea of bringing 20 or 30 or 50 people into a hotel for an hour and a half with lunch, plus an hour's drive and an hour's drive home, there's most of the day gone. And then we do the same again next week, and we do the same again the week after. Corporates were not interested. It didn't make any sense to them. But now I can take people for an hour and a half on a Sunday morning, an hour and a half the next Sunday, because everybody's working from home anyway, that we actually see tremendous improvement from level 1 to level 3 in the use of technology. We found that when people don't score well, they recognize why they haven't scored well. And most of it is not because of their intelligence, it's because they weren't able to share the information. So we have companies, I'll give you one example of, so KPS, a big furniture fit out company here, and based over the Middle East, big company. On the first level that we did with them, they scored 45 minutes on a record of 28, and it bothered them. It bothered them massively. So they went away that week and they spent quite a bit of time that week talking about how they were going to use the technology, what they had at their disposal, how does Microsoft Teams work. They had the IT department in going, how does this OneDrive work? How do we connect everything together? And by the time we got to level 3, they were breaking records. And that learning and that gamification of turning something that's essentially a learning experience into a gamification process, we have seen can give tremendous return on investment. So to go back to Mohammed, to go back to your original question, it should not be, it doesn't have to be viewed as an expense. If we're able to think of it, if a company is taking 68 minutes to do an activity that one team has taken 28 minutes, how much more time are they wasting in the real world doing real problems as well? Okay, so let's have a look at the, have I got any more time? I think I might have, I think I've got 5 more minutes according to this. Okay, good. Great ways to learn, which is, okay, no, that was just a comment. Interesting and useful. What is the first step? What is the first step to create a business case that tackles gamification importance? The first step is to email me and we'll talk. I don't know. That's a pretty broad question. We would need to know what the challenges of the business were first of all. So this, my presentation, I'm an expert in my field, but not outside of my field. So we work specifically, exclusively in working with teams and team problem solving and team dynamics. But there's all sorts of gamification that you can do in terms of, you go around some of these, some of the big multinationals, big leaderboards up everywhere, sales targets, sales leads. But Mr. Anonymous, whoever you or whoever he or she is, do send me an email and I'll be delighted to do that through. Superb collaboration through technology such as G Suite is paramount to enhancing efficient delivery of organizational goals. Yes, I 100% agree with that. We did a demonstration for a government which led to Confirm Business, a quasi-government agency a few weeks ago, and I had the HR team with me, and it was a quick level 1. It was level 1 Cocrackers that we were doing, and at the end of it, I said, "How's that?" to the team, and one of the ladies went, "Oh," she said, "Oh, I was so frustrated," and I said, "Why? What happened?" And she said, "In the real world, we would have put a flip chart up, we would have all stood around the flip chart and we would have written down our notes and everybody would have seen everything and it would have been easy." So I said to her very politely, I said, "Look," I said, "if you're saying that, you are showing me very clearly that your organization is struggling to leverage the technology. Because if any of you have used something like Miro on any workshop, it is astounding what you can do with some of the technology that's out there." So yes, 100%. If you're not embracing collaborative tools in a team environment, then anecdotally, I don't have any Gartner style research for this, but anecdotally, then your performance of your team will be lower than all of the other teams that we have seen so far. Very interesting. That's it. Okay. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. I'm going to wrap up just by saying, for us, change brings opportunity, and our industry was decimated, absolutely decimated, and we're like the phoenix. We're rising, and I know that we will build a stronger, more robust business as a result of this. And I hope that all of you guys are able to do the same thing as well. So thank you very much for your time and engagement and questions, and good luck with the future. And thank you very much. Thanks, Amal.